David, you wrote recently that the Trump presidency is on the verge of collapse. That's pretty strong language. How close do you think things are to the edge here?
There are two questions. One is, how close is Trump to a formal impeachment and removal from office? And I think we're a long way from that happening. Even if the pace continues, it's a long process. But I do think the Trump presidency is effectively frozen. His legislative priorities have not gotten anywhere so far. His executive orders have been stopped in the courts. And because of what's going on now, it's very hard to imagine him making any further progress on legislation anytime soon.
We're focused this week on the two summits coming up in Europe, the NATO summit and the G7 summit, and that's obviously part of his foreign trip. What do you think the situation at home means for him as he makes this first foreign foray?
Well, it's a great distraction for him. And we're already seeing reports that he wants to shorten the trip or find some way to get out of it, which makes sense. He's somebody who doesn't seem to enjoy this kind of travel. He also seems to struggle in settings with foreign leaders. And so even as he is in a situation he doesn't enjoy, he's also got a very, very serious political fallout going on at home.
You know, one of the reports I saw earlier this week suggested that, in fact, their briefing notes have been changed in the sense that they're inserting his name more often, that they're shortening the brief. What can you tell us about any of that?
Well, you see a whole different range of ways in which Trump seems to not really be focused on the material he deals with. You have that Reuters report that his briefers put his name in to keep his attention. Politico reported that aides are giving him fake news stories, including a photoshopped 1970s Time magazine cover, and he's unable to tell the difference between what's real and what's fake. You also have the question of him sharing classified information with the Russians, and one of the spin moves the White House has tried is to say, well, the president wouldn't have known if this was classified. It's not something he's aware of. And so he just doesn't seem to be engaging with the material or maybe even capable of focusing enough to digest it.
That sounds risky if he's heading now into a series of meetings with foreign leaders, and presumably, certainly on the agenda at both NATO and G7 are security matters. What's the concern in Washington about that?
Well, Trump seems to have a habit of giving things away when he talks to foreign leaders. In fact, we've seen that the Chinese and the Russians were both eager to have face-to-face meetings with Trump as soon as possible because they see him as somebody who's easily persuadable in person. For example, China convinced Trump after what he said was a 10-minute conversation that it didn't have the same kind of control over North Korea that he had said. They also convinced him not to brand them a currency manipulator. You see him giving the information to the Russians. So when he gets in a room with leaders like this, things sometimes don't go well. The flip side of that is even with allied leaders, for example, Angela Merkel, we've seen some very icy meetings. So it can go in a bad direction in either way for Trump when he's in a room with folks.
What does this mean then for the U.S. agenda as it heads into particularly the NATO summit and around issues of security in Europe, the relationship with Russia, persuading other people other countries to contribute more to the NATO alliance? What does that say for the agenda itself?
It's probably in trouble. Even ahead of this trip, we knew that the Trump administration and aides were eager to get him briefed and sort of get him up to speed on these issues he was going to have to deal with. And instead, the last week and a half have been consumed with the firing of the FBI director, the classified information leak, the special counsel, and so on. And so it's hard to believe he will have had time for the kind of preparation that he needed and that his aides wanted to give him.
So what does the White House then hope to accomplish on this trip?
I think at this point, probably the best goal they can hope for is to get through it unscathed. Go through the trip, make the speeches, avoid major gaffes, and hope that things stay relatively calm on the home front. And what will you be watching for? I'm fascinated by the prospect of Trump giving a speech in Saudi Arabia about Islam. I'm fascinated by what his encounter in Israel will be like, given tensions he's had with Benjamin Netanyahu in the recent last couple of weeks. And then watching the NATO summit, I think, is very interesting. Because of the way he's talked about NATO vacillating between saying it's obsolete and saying it's no longer obsolete, demanding greater contributions and clashing with allies. It could go in a number of different directions, and I'm really anxious to see which one it does.
Thank you very much for setting the scene for us.
Thank you.